Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video I'll be talking about the latest season of American Ninja Warrior ANW 13, which is a strange season to talk about here. It does feel like a bit of a transitional season of the show in many ways. While it does feel like a continuation of ANW 11 after the really strange season that ANW 12 was, ANW 13 does feel like a show that is doing everything it can to just scrape on by. I mean, for a while ANW has been struggling with losing viewership, and they obviously had additions like the Mega Wall and Power Tower to shake things up and make things interesting, but I do feel like this season in particular feels like one where they're really trying to kind of reboot in order to hopefully bring in a new audience. So despite some strong additions to the formula that were made for this season, other changes that were made did end up annoying me as a longtime fan, which we will obviously be talking about throughout the course of this video. But like my other reviews, I'll be running through the season episode by episode. Let's start off with the premiere, which I hated as an episode of the show. And I'll be honest, I actually debated if I even cared enough to continue watching the show. And a major reason for that was just how focused this first episode was on the teenagers, to the point where it did feel like they neglected the vets. But also, it was presented in such a boring way to me. Like, there are future episodes that kind of do a similar thing, but something about this first episode just straight up annoyed me to no end, to where I just hated my experience watching it. Maybe it is because, like, as the season went on, I did start to warm up to the idea of having these teenagers on the course, and a lot of them do seem very talented, which I might as well mention, like, the addition of teenagers here is a really interesting prospect to ANW, considering how so much of Ninja Warrior is based on training and technique, and just raw, natural athletic ability usually isn't enough to succeed in Ninja Warrior. And to have these teenagers who have pretty much solely trained for ninja, I do think is an interesting prospect for the show, and I think that is why we saw so much success from the teenagers here, because all of them have trained from a very young age specifically for this event, while so many of the other bigger names, so many of these other vets have other different athletic backgrounds and didn't start training for ninja until much later in their lives. So again, I have warmed up to the idea of adding teenagers to the show, but I just really hated how they were presented over the course of the entire season, as, again, just like any other trend that ANW does, they really prop them up in the edit in such a heavy-handed way where they really just shove it down your throats. As for the course, we do start off with the shrinking steps, which, again, is a fine opening obstacle, as it is one of the quickest available options. We follow that up with the Overpass, which was a new obstacle, and, I mean, it was okay. It's kind of like an easier version of the Ring Chaser, though I do like these style of obstacles where something starts moving as you start the obstacle and you have to catch up to it, and it's easier if you do so. Like, I like that element within an obstacle, but this one was relatively easy, though I did like it conceptually. But then we have one of the bigger changes for the entire season, and that is the inclusion of split decision, a point where you have the choice between two obstacles. And this is a concept I've seen before on Viking, which was such an integral part of what made that show unique, and I did really like seeing it here on ANW. The problem is that I hate how they approached it in the qualifiers here. I mean, the main intrigue that comes from this twist is the concept of having two radically different obstacles that test different skills, and that adds some strategy for the competitors when they have the choice between the two. But here for the qualifiers, the choice was just between two balance obstacles, which kind of ruined the point of it. Now, I mean, we did have domino effect or spinning log, which, to be fair, are two different types of balance obstacles, but I still found this choice to be pretty ridiculous and kind of pointless. Next, we have tipping point, which is just kind of a really awkward obstacle, where you have to move along these different shaped boards that both function pretty differently, though they both move along a pivot. And I just found it weird that, like, these boards just both function pretty differently, and it just felt like they were mixing two different concepts for obstacles together here, which is the same thing with V formation, the fifth obstacle here, which is done in an even more ridiculous way, where the ascent is similar to that of, like, the ring jump, where you have to hop upwards into these notches, but here you do so with a triangular hook. Now, the dismount is similar to that of the spin hopper, but with V-shaped handholds instead of going from side to side. Again, like, I like both of these sections of the obstacle separately, but together it makes no sense that they're the same obstacle. It really, again, just feels like they combined two radically different ideas into one obstacle with no real purpose to it. And even more so than Tipping Point, where at least with Tipping Point, like while the two boards function differently, they at least test similar skills, while here, these are two radically different skills that are tested here. So again, there's really no similarity between the two parts of this obstacle. But of course, the course ends with the warped wall as always. And we do have the mega wall returning here with the same rules as last year. Well, that's the course. Now let's talk about the results. I mean, we start off the episode with Kitawati, who used to be their darling just a couple years ago. And it is weird how the show just dropped him last year when he had like a mediocre year. And then this year, they're showing him first and use him as an example of how dangerous split decision is with him failing the spinning log. Again, a really abrupt end to his season. We do see the return of Sam San, who is seemingly only shown due to his story about his girlfriend who has cancer, but he does end up having a pretty solid run here. He gets to the very end of V Formation, which was nice to see. We do also get the first of our celebrity cameos, to which there are numerous of throughout this season, and they all feel so awkward, with them just being the celebrity watching a run on a webcam for a competitor that they have no real connection to. Like, I really don't get why this is a thing. Now, I know earlier on they were trying to promote the Olympics along the way with a lot of these celebrities being Olympians, but some of them aren't, and it just makes it even more awkward. As again, I just really don't know why they did this. Like, I would have said that, oh, they're doing this to bring in new viewers, but they didn't promote this. It's not like these were in the advertisements or anything. So I really don't get why this was even a thing. And we saw like Greg Grunberg watch Tom Mortimer's run. Again, I never heard of either of them. We had Alan Rippon root for Jonathan Horton because I guess they're both Olympians. I mean, again, like, felt really strange that this was the thing. We do get a really emotional segment in the episode with Barclay Stockett, who ends up returning for the first time since her mother's death. And she ends up failing really early on the Overpass, which was a sad end to her run. Lindsay Eccleston returned 3 months after having her kid and ends up getting all the way to V Formation, which was heavily promoted and propped up on the show, despite them not bothering to show her semifinals run, which again is the problem of A&W, that they very blatantly just use their competitors to tell whatever depressing or inspirational story they want to tell at the time and then just neglect them once they don't have one. As I said, we did get a lot from the new teenagers, with most of them at least getting to V Formation. And we do see Isabella Wakeham, who ends up probably being the most impressive female teenager of the season, get all the way to V Formation as well, and she ends up being the #1 qualifier for the women in this episode. The top 2 fastest times did end up coming from Elijah Browning and Isaiah Thomas, again both being teenagers, though I'll be honest, I didn't find either of their runs to be that impressive. And I do feel like them being at the top of the leaderboard was more so a consequence of the notable vets in the episode failing, particularly Thomas Stillings and Daniel Gill, with Thomas Stillings' season ending at the spinning log, which was a pretty underwhelming exit for him, and Daniel Gill shockingly failing when the hoop on the V Formation slipped down a rung, though he still ends up qualifying for the next round anyway. I mean, the only notable figure to end up clearing the course here was Jody Avila, who got fast-forwarded, which again plays into this thing where I was talking about, where it feels like the vets were undermined here to really just prop up the teenagers, which played a part in why I hated this premiere episode so much, despite there actually being some interesting results here and there, particularly in the fact that this round actually had the lowest amount of clears ever for a qualifying round in the history of A&W. But now for episode 2, where we did get a couple modifications to the course. The Overpass was replaced by Wait For It, which I never liked as an obstacle, and the Split Decision was changed to now be a choice between Broken Bridge and Burn Rubber, which this is what I'm talking about. These are two very similar style of obstacles, with Broken Bridge being a blatantly easier obstacle, so I did feel like this was kind of a pointless choice here. And overall, these changes to the qualifying course here, I did feel like were a net negative, though I did actually like this episode a lot more, and I feel like this was probably the best episode of the qualifying round. I feel like the teenagers didn't dominate the screen time like they did the previous episode. I mean, yes, we did see 2 teenagers in particular do very well in Josiah Papel and Kaiden Lebsack, who both clear, and Kaiden ended up having the fastest time of the night by quite a bit. And we did also see Xavier Dantzler, who we get this segment of him being mentored by Joe Moravsky, and despite him failing V-Formation, he seemed to be someone that the show was really trying to prop up, only for him to not even make the finals, and like mid-season they transitioned his storyline to like Jay Lewis, which I just found bizarre. But we do see the return of Julius Ferguson, who actually had a really great intro package, which again, like I typically hate these sob stories on A&W, but I will admit that I did find this one pretty heartwarming to hear about his friendship with Dan Champagne and how Dan helped him when he was homeless and bought him a van, and all that was pretty nice to see. Though it was sad to see Julius end up failing V-Formation and also just get neglected in the edit after this point. But we do also see Dan's run later on where he is the first clear of the night. We also see some notable women return here in Shanique Levette and Sandy Zimmerman, who both get to the V-Formation as well. Gianna Weberly had Christy Yamaguchi watching her run for some reason, but does shockingly fail at tipping point, though she does end up moving on anyway. Lance Picas moves on as well, despite him having a pretty hard fall on V-Formation. Lucas Rial gets the second fastest time of the night, while Joe Moravsky is saved for last, and he obviously ends up dominating the course. He goes for the Mega Wall and ends up getting it for the second season in a row, which was a solid end to this episode. Again, to me, this was a nice rebound episode after the premiere. I mean, it still has the same issues A&W always has, but it didn't frustrate me nearly as much. Now for episode 3, where we do see 2 new obstacles. First, we had the Air Surfer, which kind of feels like an awkward obstacle, but I did end up actually really liking it by the end, where you have to maneuver this snowboard with handles over a few gaps. And this obstacle did lead to some pretty shocking fails, with a decent amount of people overshooting the landing, making this a lot more of a technical obstacle than something like tipping point. We also had Pretzel Twists, which I hated as an obstacle. I found the aesthetics of this obstacle just be really ridiculous, with the wheels being colored like pretzels, and I just didn't find it to be that interesting of an obstacle to watch either. Now, I did find this episode overall to be really strangely put together, where so many vets get fast forwarded here, which does make me really think that the balancing of these qualifying rounds may have been a bit off, especially again with qualifier 1 having such a shortage of vets. I mean, here we see Michelle Warnke and Booty Cothran both failing split decision in fast forward. We see Michael Johnson failing Air Surfer, Dougie Fresh fails Pretzel Twist, and we get a bevy of clears that are just skipped over. People like Dan Palizzi, Kevin Carbone, Tyler Gillette, Brett Sims, Amir Malik, even RJ Roman, who ends up clearing with the fastest time of the night, gets skipped over, which was such a bizarre editing choice to me. We even see 2 teenagers that will later get more content in Max Feinberg and Enzo Wilson clearing here as well, and again, getting skipped over. It really just made this seem like a really stacked field that they just didn't know what to do with when editing the episode together. We do see Brandon Mears Run, where he talks about his curse of failing on balance obstacles and continues that curse by failing spinning log, which was pretty disappointing to see. And he does talk about possible retirement, which I do think would be disappointing if he did. Like, while Brandon Mears is never going to be like a top contender in A&W, he definitely has so much more potential to do better than what he has been doing in recent years. So I still personally would like to see him back. A couple of women had some notable runs here, like Alyssa Barcelona and Charity LeBlanc, who both get to Pretzel Twists and also get a good chunk of content in this episode, despite, again, being fast-forwarded in the semifinals. Now we do get the typical friendship storyline with Grant McCartney and Nick Hansen. However, they both end up failing the Air Surfer, which was pretty surprising. I mean, like, once one of them failed, and the fact that they were being edited together, not a surprise. Though to see them both be gone from the show this early on was a pretty big shocker to me. We see a lot of clears from some less notable figures, people like Austin Hare and Brett Strong cleared, with Brett Strong being the shortest to ever beat the Mega Wall. We also get a couple teenagers being prominent in the edit, people like Owen Dyer and, more notably, Vance Walker, who seems to be the show's favorite teenager. I mean, obviously he performs very well here in getting the Mega Wall, but really over the course of the season, it really feels like he is the main teenager that they are going all in on in the edit. But overall, this episode to me was, again, a bit of a similar mess to the first episode, but to be honest, I didn't really get as annoyed with it as episode 1, and to us, these are kind of my similar thoughts with episodes 4 and 5 as well, which are edited in a very similar sort of way. But let's get to episode 4, which was the first episode where they tried to set up this like theme right away in the intro, where we get a lot of talk about training partners, and we do get a bevy of segments about these grouping of competitors that train together, and this just all felt very forced to me. As for the course modifications, we did get a new obstacle in Double Down, which it's kind of like a mix of Double Dipper and Crank It Up, which was interesting to have as a second obstacle. I don't mind it, though it was a little bit slow for my liking. Split Decision was changed once again to now include Log Runner or Block Run, which again are at least two different obstacles. Though I will say I was kind of surprised that so many people went for Log Runner, considering I believe Log Runner is historically the more difficult obstacle. But at the end of the day, this was a mostly uneventful change. As for the results, again, we do see some training partners being highlighted here, particularly Jay Lewis and Blake Farrow, with Jay Lewis being the first clear of the night, though this is one of those situations where they really only showed the run of one of these duos and then they just skip over the other person in the While We Were Away segment after coming back from the break. A good chunk of the women actually get to the Pretzel Twist here, where it was the break-off point to qualify for the women, and we do see people like Casey Rothschild and Abby Clark get there. But despite Alyssa Beard also getting there, she does not end up qualifying due to Megan Martin end up beating her, which was an underwhelming end to Alyssa Beard's season, though we do see Megan Martin clearing, being the first woman to clear a qualifying course of the season, but also kind of feeling like a return to form from Megan Martin, who, despite her winning the Women's Championship special, has had a bit of a rocky road in the last few seasons. I do feel like this felt like one of the stronger ones she's had in a while. Sean Johnson's husband competed for some reason, and we waste a lot of time on that with him eventually failing the air surfer. And once again, we get a lot of fast forwards on this episode from pretty notable vets, people like Adam Rail, Sean Bryan, Paige Harrington, David Campbell, all clear, get fast forwarded. Brian Kretsch and Austin Gray both fail the Pretzel Twist and are just not shown. But towards the end of the episode, we do get some pretty quick clears from people like Nate Hansen, Ethan Swanson, and Jake Murray, who does end up closing out the episode with the fastest time of the night. Again, to me, this was just overall a very meh episode of the show that just suffered from the same flaws of the last few episodes. Now for episode 5, which starts off with another theme, this time showing mentors and students, which was, again, another 4 storyline. As for the course, we do see that the Long Runner was modified to have one less log for some reason. We do also add a new obstacle called the Tilt-A-Whirl, which felt like a relatively easy obstacle, and I'll be honest, I did find it kind of boring to watch. And we also see the return to Sideways, which is also not that interesting of an obstacle. And overall, this did feel like the easiest of the qualifying courses, while also having a pretty strong group of competitors here that did lead to 18 people clearing the course this round, the most of the season. Now we do start off the episode with Leif Sunberg, who I remember for having this really fast run back in ANW 11, but here we do see him trip up on the Log Runner and does have this amazing recovery, but due to the time that he wasted there, he does end up failing the Sideways and not qualifying due to time anyway. We do see the Green Twins return to where they get some screen time over a bet where the loser has to shave their head, which, again, like, who cares? This is boring. But again, a lot of this episode did focus around these like teacher-student relationships, people like Flip and Ninja Cow, where Flip starts off what ends up being a pretty bad season for him here by failing the Sideways, though Ninja Cow does end up clearing the course with one of the faster times. We do see Jamie Ron and his protege Sam Folson both clear as well. We see 2 guys that call themselves the Ninja Teens, despite not actually being teens anymore, but one of them in Chris Berenz ends up clearing. Megan Rowe ends up getting a ridiculous amount of content this season about how she throws axes, which is fine, I guess. But she ends up being the second place woman of the episode. Jackson Twite ends up returning and clearing the Mega Wall, which really came out of nowhere to me. And we also see a number of vets get fast forwarded. People like Taylor Amon failing Sideways. We see Tyler Yamauchi, Kyle Soderman, Hunter Gerard, Cam Baumgartner all clearing. We see a pretty shocking fail from Chris DeGangi with him failing Block Run, where we do follow that up with Jessie Lebrecht pretty easily clearing the course as you would expect her to. Brian Beckstand returns after not competing in 5 years and ends up clearing, but really he was just there to prop up his son Kai, who does end up dominating the course, clearing with the fastest time of the night by around 15 seconds. Kyle Scholze returns, and he has a pretty great run with him struggling through having an injured shoulder to get the Sideways, and he ends up getting to the very end of the obstacle, but fails, but is also able to barely squeak on by in 30th place after the final runner of the night in Michael Torres shockingly fails at double down, which really came out of nowhere. Really interesting that they decided to end the qualifiers with that round. But again, overall, same thing as last episode, same thing as episode 3, same thing as episode 1. I feel like a lot of these qualifying episodes really suffered from some pretty inconsistent editing. But with that, let's move on to episode 6, the start of the semifinals. And I did really like how they formatted the semifinals here, where the Power Tower does return, modified, and probably better than what it used to be. Though I do think it was also more prone to mistakes that caused some of the races on it to not be as interesting as you would hope them to be. But the reward for winning the Power Tower is still the safety pass, which at this point, I think I'm fine with. Like, I'll be honest, I personally don't hold that much weight in an A&W total victory at this point. It's not like Sasuke to where, if this was on Sasuke, I would be very upset. Like, I would not be happy with someone getting an unwarranted second chance. But with A&W, it's like, I don't care. Like, who cares? Let him get another shot. I mean, we've already seen Drew win with a safety pass. Just let someone else do it too. Who cares at this point? But I did like the changes that they made to the course here. Now, for some reason, they decided to bring back the lunatic ledges, which, I mean, who really cares? But the first split decision was taken out and replaced with just the spin bridge, which again is a fine middle difficulty balance obstacle. We do have a new obstacle in the 5th obstacle position, with it being the wall to wall, which was a fine modification of the spider flip, but not a super notable obstacle in the grand scheme of things. After the warp wall, we do have the salmon ladder, obviously, which is then followed by corkscrew, which I loved last season, but they severely nerfed it here, where they added a resting bar between the two obstacles that clearly lowered the difficulty, and also it did seem to drop a bit slower, so no one ends up actually failing it here. But then we get to the new split decision for this round, where we get the choice between an upper body obstacle or a very difficult balance obstacle, which is again exactly what I wanted. I just wish we had the same dichotomy back in the qualifiers. But another thing I do love is how this choice affects time. Again, the Power Tower is in play, where the top 2 people go to the Power Tower. So speed is something that you're going to be thinking about on this course, and with the balance obstacle very clearly being so much quicker, it does add an interesting choice here for the competitors over the risk and reward of picking that path. Now, for obstacles themselves, the upper body obstacle here is a new one called Inverter, which was an interesting mix of the unstable bridge and cliffhanger that does do a decent amount of damage in this episode, though I do feel like a lot of that was mostly due to how easy corkscrew was, as the next time we see Inverter, it doesn't do nearly as much damage. Though I do actually really like the obstacle. Conceptually, the balance obstacle is also really interesting here, with it being the return of the tuning forks. This obstacle that was really brutal back in A&W 10, one of the most difficult balance obstacles really in the history of the show, and one that proved to be extremely dangerous here as well. The final obstacle is just the spider trap again, which is kind of bland, but to be honest, who really cares at that point? While the invisible ladder is probably my ideal final obstacle, it is also extremely difficult, so I don't feel like they have a great alternative to it, so I'm kind of just fine with it being there, as at this point the person's more than likely going to clear anyway. But as for the results, they were very spread out. I mean, the top 15, the people that end up moving on, all made it to split decision, making that the breakoff point. However, 16th place failed all the way back at wall to wall, which again is a 3 obstacle gap there. Now, there are a couple notable early fails, with people like Sam Sand failing the spin bridge. You got Jonathan Horton failing lunatic ledges. Jody Avila was again that 16th place person that ends up failing on the wall to wall, probably being one of the more shocking fails of the episode, along with Zanique Lavette, who ends up really shockingly failing the tilt-a-whirl, but gets extremely lucky by the fact that the number of women qualifiers was bumped up from 2 to 3, as she ends up scraping on by in 3rd place, where the top 2 women both made it to split decision. But most people of note here at least get to split decision. I mean, Christian Yost gets a ridiculous intro of him being this old school gamer, and we have these really staged shots of him playing in an arcade, which was just weird, but he is the first to fail on the inverter. Lance Pekus, Isabella Wakeham, Elijah Browning all also failed the inverter, while people like Tiana Weberly, Owen Dyer, and Isaiah Thomas all failed the tuning forks. We We do also get 4 clears here, the only teenager of which being Max Feinberg. Abel Gonzalez's clear gets fast forwarded, but the other 2 do end up making it to the Power Tower, where we obviously have Daniel Gill, as you would expect, but we also have Brian Burkhart, who really comes out of nowhere. Now, I know he is someone that has been competing for a while, but he was never really someone that is that prominent in the edit, so it was nice to see him make a name for himself here, leading us to the Power Tower, where he ends up actually beating Daniel Gill, largely due to Gill missing the transition to the Salmon ladder, but it does lead to an upset, though one that was kind of underwhelming as, again, the race was pretty much done about halfway through. But now for episode 7, where on the course we do see the return of Double Twister, which again is a pretty standard second obstacle. That's really just not super notable. We do also see the return of Ring Chaser, which was an obstacle I really loved last season, and I was pretty happy to see it back. The Corkscrew gets replaced by the Padlock, which turns out to be a pretty difficult obstacle. I mean, it is a really awkward one where you have the transition between these 3 massive discs. And the second one in particular seems extremely difficult, where you have to spin the disc while on it to get the ledge to be on the bottom and then transfer to it without accidentally spinning the disc. And it seems pretty difficult there. Only 7 people end up clearing it out of the 22 attempts, but right away the first run that we do see is from Rachel DeGuts, who does become the only woman to clear it here, despite her ending up failing the tuning forks anyway. But as I mentioned, the Padlock really ends up being the breakoff point here, with some pretty notable figures failing here and not moving on. We have people like Xavier Dantzler, we have Will Schlegeter, we have Chad Flexington, we have Julius Ferguson, we have Judas Licardello, other people like Casey Rothschild, Lucas Rial, Jackson Twite, they all fail there as well, though they do move on. We do see a number of surprising fails earlier in the course, with people like Dougie Fresh failing the Salmon ladder and Sandy Zimmerman failing the Ring Chaser, where the handle just slides off the hook, which was a shocking end to her season. But we do also get 5 clears here. Amir Malik clears with Hannah Teeter watching his run for some reason. The teenagers do pretty well here as well, with True Becker and Kaiden Lebsack clearing, along with Jay Lewis, who ends up clearing with the fastest time of the episode. And it is here where we all of a sudden learn that he also trains with Joe Moravsky. And later in the episode, we have Joe's run where he clears with the second fastest time, really setting up this like teacher versus student power tower. But I will say, I did find it very insulting that they kept on saying that Joe Moravsky had old man strength. And it's like, Joe Moravsky is like 32. Like, he is not that old. But the power tower itself was just kind of boring, where Joe just completely dominates it and is ahead of Jay the entire way through, giving him a safety pass that he will very much need. Now for episode 8, where for the course we do see them switching out the spin bridge for Diamond Dash, which just doesn't matter. Arbitrary change. We then get Drop Zone as the new 5th obstacle, which conceptually I do think is a cool obstacle, but it is one that is extremely dangerous in a way that seems like the producers didn't realize, which I really don't get, where we see multiple people get hurt by it with them hitting their heads on it. Now we do see them modify it for the next episode to add padding to it, but I just feel like overall this was just such a massive oversight on production's end to put this version of the obstacle on the course to begin with. And really just overall, like I just feel like this is an obstacle that, despite it being a cool one, is one that we probably just shouldn't see again due to how dangerous it could be. We do also get a new split decision where we get the return of the dungeon as the upper body obstacle, which I do still really like, but it is a very easy obstacle. I think really the dungeon would probably fit a lot better as a 4th or 5th obstacle placement than something saved for the 9th obstacle. And the new balance obstacle that we have here is the diving boards, which realistically, I do think the tuning forks is harder than the diving boards, but I did really like the addition that they made here for the diving boards, where they have this really high landing platform that does make the obstacle a lot more difficult, as you pretty much have to be upright by the time that you hit the final board and can't just stumble your way through it. Now the episode does start with Sean Bryan, and I was a bit worried to see him go first. Now, going first isn't a death sentence in terms of moving on, but we rarely ever see someone that goes first end up clearing the course, but surprisingly, Sean does here. But along the way, he does get injured by Drop Zone to where there's blood just falling off his face immediately after the obstacle, which did lead to a more riveting run, which I'm sure the producers were happy about, but still, again, very irresponsible of them to be having this on the course. And we later do see a similar thing happen to David Campbell, where again, he hits his head on drop zone, starts bleeding because of it, and what's even more frustrating for him is that he ends up missing the landing on the obstacle where his hit foots the water, which means that's essentially the way that he ends up going out there. We once again do see a lot of padlock fails, with half of the people that reach it end up failing it, with some notable fails here from people like Kevin Carbone, Tage Harrington, Enzo Wilson, Megan Martin, and Megan Rowe. Brian Kretsch sadly fails there and doesn't end up moving on. Now, split decision, everyone that ends up picking the dungeon ends up clearing it, while everyone that picks diving boards ends up failing it, taking out Nate Pardo, Tyler Gillette, and surprisingly RJ Roman. But we do see some vets clearing here in Adam Rail and Brett Sims, though the two fastest clears of the night do come from two teenagers in Josiah Papel and Vance Walker, where the tower power is pretty close, but Vance ends up winning, adding to his very impressive resume at this point in the season. And now for episode 7, the final semi-final, where we do see the return of the barrel roll, which I always found to be a really bizarre obstacle, but is also an extremely easy one. So I'm surprised they brought it back. And we also see the return of the crazy clocks, which is another relatively easy obstacle, but we still saw a decent amount of surprising fails there. But I do think due to these two obstacles toning down the difficulty of the course, we do end up seeing 12 clears here. Really ridiculous for a semifinals round, making it so that some of the people that even made the split decision didn't end up moving on. And we do see some pretty big names failing on the crazy clocks and not end up qualifying, which is pretty insane to me, where we have people like Flip Rodriguez, Kyle Scholze, Ninja Cow, and Ethan Swanson even, all failing there and not moving on. Ethan Swanson being the most gutting of the bunch, as all he needed to do was land on the landing platform and he would have qualified for the next round. We did also see a couple bizarre segments in this episode, with Sem Garay being introduced with like Akbar pretending to be his manager, which was weird. We had Devin Alexander getting this segment about how his mom trains him, and really just his entire edit gets overtaken by his mom. But even more ridiculously was the appearance of two TikTok stars who I've never heard of in my entire life. But we waste so much time on just seeing them run the course with no explanation of why they're doing so. It was just so jarring to me, and again, really just shows me that this show is not made for me anymore. Now, despite the high clear count, a couple people did fail on split decision, with Dan Palizzi failing the dungeon and not end up moving on. We had Jonathan Matoyer and Jamie Ron both failed diving boards, but did get to move on. Which, by the way, Jamie Ron's run was watched by Johnny Weir for some reason. But again, we do get so many clears here, a lot of them being fast-forwarded. People like Michael Salenzi, Hunter Gerard, Kyle Soderman, Cam Baumgartner, Tyler Yamauchi. We had others that did get their own segments, like Nate Hansen, Eric Middleton, Kai Beckstrand, and Jessie Lebrecht, who was the only woman to clear a semifinals course this season. But the two fastest times do end up going to Austin Gray and Jake Murray, who do have a fine power tower, though Jake does end up failing towards the end of it, leading to Austin Gray winning, which kind of ends the semifinals in an anticlimactic way. But now we're on to episode 10, finally seeing Vegas for the first time in 2 years. And watching Vegas really made me remember why I loved A&W to begin with. I've said this before, that to me, Vegas is the real show, and everything before it is just filler to pad out the season. And I really did love watching stage 1 here. I mean, while there were certain obstacles here that ideally would go, and we did end up getting a large amount of clears, I did still enjoy watching the runs on the course. I mean, we do start off with a new obstacle called the Slide Surfer, which felt like a fine modification of other like quick first obstacles. Not a super notable one, but again, failable, so it's fine for what it is. The second obstacle is now the Swinging Blades, which again is also similar to that of previous second obstacles, where you have a jump to a very quick upper body obstacle that has a big lache in it. Again, not entirely original, but I did like the Swinging Blades fine enough here. Definitely not an obstacle I need to see again, though. After this, we do get a string of returning obstacles, starting with the Double Dipper, which I still do love. Again, still really fun, though it didn't do as much damage as it typically does. We then see the Jumping Spider, which did a lot more damage than I was expecting, but I really want the Jumping Spider to go at this point. I mean, it's literally been every season of A&W, and it is pretty stale to me. Though, obviously, it is still a pretty good obstacle, very iconic, and I get why they keep it, but to me it is pretty unnecessary. We follow that up with Tire Run, which I'm surprised is still there. I mean, yeah, I did take out some pretty big names last time, but I never found this to be that interesting of an obstacle. Now, it is better than most of the other like half pipe attack replacements that we've had over the years, but still not my favorite obstacle in the world. After that, we have the Warped Wall, which, again, this might be controversial as well, but why is this still here? Again, yes, it is iconic, but to me, the Warped Wall doesn't really have a place in Stage 1 in Vegas anymore, as it's such a basic obstacle and one that is trained on so much that it's very rarely ever going to single-handedly take out a person, and I just don't feel like it's necessary on Stage 1 of Vegas at this point, when we also have it in qualifiers and in semifinals. It just feels a bit repetitive here. Then we have a new obstacle called Dipping Birds, which was a pretty boring and seemingly easy balance obstacle, but I was fine with it because of what was after it, where it turns out that we do have a split decision for the final obstacle of the course. Now, the most standard route is the fly hooks into rope ladder, pretty standard and pretty slow, but you have another option for a quicker route, where after the wall you can hit a button, which causes a ring to slide down, and you have to clear the Dipping Birds quick enough in order to make the jump to the ring, and I adore this obstacle. Called the High Road. To be honest, I would love it if this was just straight up the final obstacle, if there was no split decision, and this was the only one there. Again, this is a style of obstacle that I've been waiting for years on A&W. I mean, this is an idea that came from Kunoichi, the female version of Sasuke, where there was an obstacle called the Flying Pillar that you push a button to activate it sliding down a track, and you have to catch up to the pillar in time. And during Kunoichi 7, they added a balance obstacle before it called the Log Jam, where you have to hit the button before the Log Jam but catch to the pillar after it. And this was a very lethal combination in Kunoichi, and I really wanted to see something like that again on Sasuke or on A&W, and I did love that we did see the High Road here. And that did lead to a lot of intrigue in the back portion of Stage 1. As for the results, I mean, we did see a large amount of clears, but despite that, I did feel like we got a decent amount of shocking fails as well that did still make this stage really interesting. We did see some promising newer competitors fail early, like Cam Baumgartner failing the swinging blades, Amir Malik and Jay Lewis both failing double dipper, Nate Hansen failed the jumping spider, and really a decent amount of people failed the jumping spider, including some vets like Eric Milton and Abel Gonzalez. We also find out that Daniel Gill had to drop out due to COVID, which is obviously sad in the sense that like he was a very clear frontrunner to win this season. But to replace him, we have Jody Avila, who surprisingly fails on Dipping Birds. We do have some impressive runs from some of the women, like Tiana Weberly getting to fly hooks and Isabella Wakeham getting to Dipping Birds, but failing it mostly due to her running out of time. But I do think she is a competitor that has shown a lot of potential on this season, and someone that I would be interested in seeing doing better in seasons to come. But in general, we do get a decent amount of clears from the teenagers here, with Isaiah Thomas being the first shown clear. We have Max Feinberg, Elijah Browning, and Kaiden Lebsack also clearing. Vance Walker once again gets a lot of focus for his clear. Matt Bradley kind of comes out of nowhere for me, and him having a really great run here as well. And then we have a barrage of vets clearing, with most of them getting fast forwarded. People like Sean Bryan, Kevin Carbone, Tyler Gillette, and Austin Gray. Adam Rail has a pretty thrilling run where he clears with 0.1 second left on the clock. Donovan Metoyer also has a notable run where he struggles early on and still decides to go for the 360 on the warp wall, which causes him to be really low on time, but then he ends up getting the High Road, which leads to him clearing, which was fun. But really, the High Road did lead to a couple of notable fails as well. And first from Lucas Reale, but later, more shockingly, from Joe Moravsky, who was the final run of the night. And I was genuinely shocked at his fail, as I was not expecting them to end the episode with the fail from him. But I did like it as a change of pace here. And with that, we move on to episode 11 to finish off Stage 1, where we do get some more shocking fails. And we start off with Brett Sims, who, despite him going first, I actually did think he was getting set up for a clear here, but we disappointingly see him time out at the very end. RJ Roman and Hunter Gerard, two people who are very known for their speed, also surprisingly end up timing out. Jamie Ron surprisingly loses his grip on the fly hooks. Megan Martin fails the first obstacle, which was a shocking end to her season considering how strong of a season she has had. Brett Hernandez Strong got a segment about his dead grandma, which I felt was very exploitative, though I did really feel bad for him when he fails the second obstacle. We did get a couple of surprising tire run fails here from Lance Pekas and Shanika Levette, But as I said, we did get a number of clears, with many of them being fast-forwarded. Ryan Meeks cleared, who I feel like I've never heard of this person in my entire life. Kai Beckstrand, Jonathan Godbout, Josiah Papel, and Enzo Wilson are the teenagers that made it through. Isaiah Wakeham, Tyler Yamauchi, and Kyle Soderman also unceremoniously clear and get fast-forwarded. We do see Joe Moravsky's second run where he is able to clear this time. Brian Burkhart also has a notable run here where he barely grabs onto the high road and ends up clearing. Jake Murray just dominates the course here, clearing with the fastest time by over 30 seconds. And the final runner of the stage was Jessie Lebrecht, where she finally clears stage 1, which was really nice to see as she's come so close so many times in the past. And really, this was just inevitable, but she does do it in a really solid pace. And overall, again, I did really enjoy stage 1 this time around. But the episode doesn't end there. We also get around to starting stage 2, which I did really like. I mean, it was completely redesigned, and while it is still overly upper body focused and a bit of a slower course than my ideal, I do think it was an overall improvement. We do start off with the striding steps along straight lane of small platforms, which we have seen before in the skills comp, and I did like it as a quick way to start stage 2 here. It does feel like a radical change from the typical start that we have to this stage, especially with it being like a lower body balance obstacle instead of a time-wasting upper body obstacle. But this leads directly into the double salmon ladder, which I feel like they have completely run out of ideas for the salmon ladder at this point. And again, this is something else that should probably just go at this point, especially in the Vegas course, but they did change it up slightly by opening up the top of each ladder, making it possible to overshoot the final notch, which I guess led to some intrigue. We do then follow it up with the V formation, which I was surprised to see. I mean, I don't hate this obstacle, but again, it's still a bizarrely concepted one to me. But it did provide enough variety here in stage 2 that I didn't find it to be a boring obstacle to watch. We then follow that up with a new obstacle called the hammer drop, which they were really propping up in the edit here. And I do think it is a cool obstacle. It is kind of a mix of the swing surfer and the log grip. And that initial drop is really fun to watch, though I do think the back half of the obstacle is a bit slow. But again, it is an interesting twist to what is a pretty stale formula at this point. We then end the stage with 2 larger versions of obstacles we've already seen, starting it off with the epic air surfer, which was fine. Definitely better than the grim sweeper, the obstacle that it ended up replacing. I obviously would have preferred a faster obstacle here, but in comparison to the obstacles that have been in this spot in the last few tournaments, which have usually been very difficult obstacles in Wingnut Alley and the double wedge, I did feel like this was a decent level of difficulty, but not at a point where it overpowered the entire field. And because of that, we do see a lot of people get to the final obstacle of the stage, which really ended the stage in a riveting way, with the final obstacle being the falling shelves. An obstacle filled with pretty basic cliches until the very last one where you have to do a blind transfer. I mean, I do personally like having a failable obstacle as the final obstacle in the stage. Definitely better than the water wall, which was just a straight up boring obstacle. And having like literally the final thing you do in the entire stage be something that is actually like really difficult does make this stage really suspenseful by the end of it. Overall, I would have personally, again, liked a quicker course, but again, this is A&W, so we're not going to get that. So I did think this stage was a fine enough compromise. But now for results, and on this episode, stage 2 only took up about 45-ish minutes of the episode, less than half of it. And most of it comprised of fails, though it did have some fun runs to watch. I mean, we did start off with Elijah Browning, who showcases the stage by getting all the way to the final transition on the falling shelves, showing how riveting that final obstacle can be. We then get some hammer drop fails from Max Feinberg and Anthony Porter, some fails on the air surfer like Tage Harrington and Kevin Carbone, and Tyler Gillette surprisingly fails on the salmon ladder, where we get to talk about the stage 3 curse, which they really try to prop up this curse that all the people that made stage 3 in A&W are not doing well in this season. And spoiler, none of those people end up moving on to stage 3 here. Donovan Matoyer surprisingly fails the striding steps, which I was thinking was going to be a super easy obstacle, but we do see some shocking fails over the course of stage 2 here. But the main focus of the episode ends up going to Vance Walker, who was clearly going to make a deep run on this season based on the edit throughout it. Though he does initially fail on the salmon ladder, which was a shock, but he does have a safety pass, so he does get to run again, and they do save him for last in this episode where he unsurprisingly clears the stage. And with that, we move on to the finale where we do continue on with stage 2. And I was surprised to see how lethal it continued to be here, where we do end up with only 4 clears on stage 2, despite there being a large amount of stage 1 clears. I was surprised to see how many more people failed the hammer drop, with Tyler Yamauchi, Jonathan Godbout, and Matt Bradley failing there. A couple of the other less prominent figures that made it to stage 2 end up getting fast forwarded here as well, like Isaiah Wakeham failing on the salmon ladder and Ryan Meeks failing on the air surfer. Some of the prominent teenagers end their run here as well, with Isaiah Thomas also failing on the air surfer. And I was surprised to see Enzo Wilson fail on V formation after how much they seemed to really prop him up in Vegas here. I expected him to at least make the end of stage 2. Kai Beckstrand surprisingly fails on the striding steps, and to go along with that, I was mind blown to see Joe Moravsky fail on the striding steps. Now, we did get a commercial where it did seem like Joe was starting to fall sideways on the striding steps, but I was thinking there's no way they're spoiling this in the commercial, right? But no, he actually does fail there, which, again, coming into this finale, I thought there was a good chance that he was going to be last man standing. So for him to fail like this basic of an obstacle was a massive shock. We also get Jesse Lebrecht, who ends up failing on the salmon ladder, which I'll be lying if I were to say I was surprised, though again, it would have been nice to see her get a lot further. I did once again love the falling shelves in this episode, with so many notable figures failing there right at the end of the stage. We had Adam Rail, we had Sean Bryan, we had Josiah Propel, Mike Silenzi, and the most impactful of which for me was probably Jake Murray, who, again, I was very much expecting him to clear, especially considering I thought he got a pretty strong edit this season. Then again, Jake Murray always gets a strong edit, but I really thought this was his time to get to stage 3 and, again, possibly be last man standing there. But he ends up failing at the end, and we see him get really emotional, which goes against this like happy-go-lucky persona that he usually exudes. So I really did feel for him there, and he did talk about possible retirement, which I think it would be a shame if he does end up doing so, as again, I still think he has a lot of potential moving forward. We then also see Brian Burkhart get fast forwarded, where he has to use a safety pass after failing on the salmon ladder, only for him to then fail stage 2 again, but this time at the end of Air Surfer. But with Brian's run being fast forwarded right before Austin Gray's run, another safety pass holder, it did make it apparent to me that he was going to clear here, and he does, being the first clear of the night. We also surprisingly see Kyle Soderman clear, who had been fast forwarded the entire season before this. And also surprising to me, the final run of the stage was Kaiden Lebsack, who, despite having a decent amount of screen time for his qualifying run, he's been pretty quiet in the edit since then. And for him to all of a sudden be portrayed as if he's like the star of the show was very jarring to me, but he does end up clearing stage 2 with the fastest time here. Overall, again, I did really enjoy stage 2 here. Ideally, again, it would be a faster course. I think I would have preferred if we got a few more clears, especially from some notable vets, as that is something that I think we were massively lacking moving forward, where out of people moving on here, I mean, Austin Gray is the only really established vet, and along with Kyle Soderman, again, they're both good, but not really people I ever thought had a chance of winning it all, and then the other two are teenagers who we just met this season. So I did wish that we got at least one big name like a Jake Murray or Joe Moravsky into stage 3. But let's move on to stage 3, where we end up running the competitors in order of their times in stage 2. So we start off with Vance Walker, then Kyle Soderman, then Austin Gray, then Kaiden Lebsack. Now, as for the course, it does largely stay the same as A&W 11, which did scream out to me that they were trying to get a winner here, though obviously they were unsuccessful. We do start with Grip and Tip, which I find to be a pretty dull first obstacle, and a really awkward one as well. We then have a new obstacle called the Stalactites, which feels like a weird name for an A&W obstacle, but it's a pretty standard filler stage 3 obstacle, nothing too dissimilar from like the circuit boards. We then have Up for Grabs, which did originate in A&W 11, but I'll be completely honest, I forgot this obstacle existed until I looked it up, though it did seem to be a relatively easy obstacle for stage 3 here. We then have the Ultimate Cliffhanger, which at this point is so boring to me. Like, I really want them to get rid of it entirely or do something interesting with it. I mean, it would be nice if they literally just took from Sasuke. Like, I would rather have that, especially with the shorter ledges, as the ledges on the American Ultimate Cliffhanger are ridiculously large. But to me, this just really feels like a random assortment of ledges all over the place. Like, at least the original Ultimate Cliffhanger seemed to have a rhythm to it, while here it really doesn't. And it just feels like they're just placing ledges wherever they feel like it. And I just don't find it an interesting obstacle to watch anymore. We follow that up with the return of Pipe Dream, which was slightly modified from last season by adding different types of poles towards the end of it, and it's fine. Though I feel like it would be a lot better if it was earlier on the course, like maybe in the second or third obstacle spot. I always found its placement after the cliffhanger to be kind of bizarre. But after that, we have a new obstacle in the Eyeglass Alley, which was a pretty unique obstacle of having to navigate a bar with 2 rings on its ends along a series of hooks, which was cool, though it did feel relatively easy for this spot on the course. I think the main thing that made it so difficult was the fact that you have already been through all the obstacles you've been through, making it so that you're tired by this point. But I do feel like if this was like the first or second obstacle, like no one would really have that much of an issue with it. And for me personally, I would rather see Cane Lane here, which was the obstacle it took over for. But for what it is, it was fine. And then the last obstacle is the flying bar again, for whatever reason. Again, this is another obstacle that 100% should go. It's another one of these that is so practiced on at this point that anyone that makes it to this point in the course should easily clear it. So again, just get rid of it, please. It's just not that interesting to watch anymore. But overall, I did find stage 3 here to be kind of underwhelming, especially after me loving stages 1 and 2. I really would have liked more modifications to the course, especially after we just had a total victory. And I have no doubt that if we had some of the top competitors get here, like Daniel Gill or Joe Moravsky, that they would have easily cleared this course. But we then get to the run, starting off with Vance Walker, and I came into stage 3 thinking Vance was going to be our winner. I mean, he had such a great edit throughout the entire season, and with the constant talk, even at the beginning of the episode, about how teenagers have dominated the season, I was expecting a teenager to win at this point. And when they were bringing up time, I wasn't expecting anyone to clear, so we do end up seeing Vance fail on the Eyeglass Alley, and I was thinking he was still going to be the last man standing. We then see Kyle Soderman unceremoniously fail on the cliffhanger, and without going to commercial, we then see Austin Gray take on the course with 30 minutes left in the episode, which is when I realized that means Kaiden is actually going to end up clearing stage 3 here, which again was a surprise to me. Again, it was strange how his stage 1 run wasn't even shown, and he was so quiet in the edit until this finale episode, yet he still ends up being the last man standing here. But we do see Austin Gray fail in Eyeglass Alley as well, though with a faster time than Vance, which further cemented that I was pretty confident Kaiden was going to be last man standing. And he really just blows everyone away. I mean, he gets to Eyeglass Alley in a faster time than Austin, and then proceeds to clear the entire course, guaranteeing himself to be the last man standing, which again is very impressive for a 15-year-old to be the only one to get to final stage here, and definitely not how I saw this season ending. But the season itself does end pretty anticlimactically there, where on the final stage, again, it's still the very boring rope climb. Like, again, why haven't they changed it up at this point? Like Sasuke, like add a spider walk, add a salmon ladder, add anything. Just a rope climb is so boring. But again, I was 100% expecting Kaiden to get total victory here at this point, especially after we get this segment about how he trained on rope climbing beforehand. But he ends up making a massive mistake from the offset, where he starts climbing using only his arms, which is a strat that we've seen people attempt on Sasuke, but I don't think it's ever been successful, and it isn't here either. And he does end up timing out not even that close to the top, which ends this season of the show, which again felt very abrupt on the edit. I feel like, again, if we had a total victory, it would feel a bit more fitting, but here for him to fail the final stage and the episode to end there just felt weird. I mean, this is the first time in A&W that this has ever happened, where we get to the final stage and don't have a winner. And I think for a show like A&W, it doesn't really work to have that style of ending, as I think with A&W, you kind of expect that if someone actually makes the final stage, they are going to win. And I feel like to me, it would have been more satisfying to see him fail on Eyeglass Drop just with the fastest time and that be the ending to the season, than for him to outclass everyone but still end up failing. And I think a lot of that comes from the differences between A&W and Sasuke, where obviously with A&W being a longer show with qualifying and semifinals just to get to Vegas, and for all of that to just end with a simple rope climb where no one ends up winning it anyway, like, I don't know, it just feels anticlimactic to me, despite if this happened on Sasuke, it would be fine. That's a typical ending for Sasuke. But I think it's time to wrap up the season. I mean, for me, again, at the end of the day, it was fine. And A&W is not a show that, I'll be honest, I really have super strong opinions on at this point. I mean, I've just kind of accepted that the show is just not for me, though there are still strong moments from pretty much every season that I do end up enjoying that make me continue on watching the show. I mean, there were changes this season I did not like. I did not like the focus on teenagers. I did not like these dumb celebrity cameos. There were changes on this season I did like, though, in the addition of Split Decision. I did like the overall course design of stages 1 and 2, even though stages 3 and 4 did feel stale to me. But I did enjoy Vegas as a whole. I mean, it really did remind me why I love the show to begin with. But the season does still have the same flaws that A&W has always had. And I do think the failure of a lot of notable vets ended up leading to the season being a bit underwhelming to me, to where it doesn't really stand out as much as A&W 11, which was a season I did end up really enjoying. I do think this season probably would land towards the middle of my A&W season rankings. At least as of right now, I feel like it's a more notable season than that of A&W's 8, 9, and 10, but to be honest, it might just be recency bias with this just being the last season I watched. So it's not a season that I absolutely hated, but it's not a season that I hold in super high regard either. But that is my review of A&W 13. I'll be honest, I did consider dropping this show as one I was going to be covering moving forward, especially earlier on in the season. But at this point, I do think I'm a bit back on board to where I'll probably be back for A&W 14. I'll also definitely do a review of Sasuke 39, which has been confirmed to be coming later this year, so stay tuned for that. I also at one point want to continue on with the History of A&W series. I don't know when that will be. And to be honest, if it were to return at this point, it would probably be in a radically different format than how I originally started out as. But I would like to talk about A&W's 4 and 5 and some of those other seasons down the road. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.